Hi, everyone, and welcome to my new show, Out of Nowhere. It's a brand new show, been going um, about 2.5 months, I think, something like that. I used to be on Beacon of Light Radio. Now I've swapped. I'm doing my own show now, so it's a bit different format. We're still on StreamYard, so it's quite good. Well, my special guest today is Paul Askoff. Paul is a former paramedic in both the National Health Service and the British Army. He has been involved in UFO research for over 50 years. His first book by Paul is a refreshing new slant on the subject, UFOs. And his new book out now is called UFOs, The Real Story. Welcome, Paul, to the show. Hello there.
Hello, and thank you for having me on, Bob. Good to be here.
That's no problem. Thank you. Thank you very much. What made you write the new revised book again about the UFOs, the real story? What made you write it again?
I didn't write it. I added to it. I made it more comprehensive and put more explanations in and more sightings that I'd had. So my initial book was my ideas of how things worked, because from this my first sighting of UFOs, I wanted to know how something could move like that, how something could, how can it look like that and move like that, and I not know about it when it was so obvious in the sky. And then how could it connect to me? How could a message come to me? And it was that was the hook that got me in, and it was the nuts and bolts, the physics of it that I wanted to know. And I suppose we all have different experiences, and I think what I did in the first part of my book was how things happened chronologically to me and my experiences, and how it led into how I think things work now.
Tell us about you when you were growing up and your sighting. When you were growing up, what happened?
Well, we lived on the edge of a small village out in the countryside on the West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire border, and we had taken our dogs and the neighbour's dog for a walk. And as children, I was 11 years old and my younger brother was 9. It was September, early September, 1968, long time ago. But the normal, you could see things quite plainly. And my father had a telescope, and as we used to, our normal thing, we'd put the dogs away, say good night to mum and dad, go to bed. And my father was in the front garden. So mum said, go say night to your dad. So we went out like you do, dutiful kids, give him a kiss good night. And there was a bench in front of the lounge window looking due east. Now, to the north of the sky, it was completely covered in a thick blanket of cloud, but it ended very abruptly on this bank of cloud. And then all in front of us and to the south was clear. And literally the first constellations were coming out, and my father's just pointing them out to us. And as the three of us are looking at the sky, 2 UFOs, one slightly to one side and slightly behind the other, came out of this bank of cloud really fast and then just stopped dead. As they did that, I got a voice quite clearly in my head that said, oops, we weren't meant to have been seen. Now, don't ask me how I got that, but I did, and I got it as a friendly masculine voice. And then there was nothing else, and they were still for a few seconds, probably the size of a 5p piece at arm's length, so they were quite large, and you could see the light off them, the one nearest the cloud especially, reflecting off the surface of the cloud. Perfectly spherical. There were no noise, no rotation, no anything, just these brilliant pearly white balls of light. And then after they'd been still for a few seconds, suddenly they were moving away from us, going really, really fast down the edge of this bank of cloud. They kept the same position relative to each other, and there didn't look to be anything joining them together. And as they moved away, as they were moving, it looked like there was an atmosphere around them, and it made this tiny, tiny teardrop shape. And there was no sound, no anything, and they just moved away from us until they disappeared in the haze in the distance. And my father was, I mean, you can imagine the three of us were like mouths agape looking at the sky. And my father, who did his national service with the RAF, he was the first to speak. And he just said, there's nothing we've got that can do that. And one thing I always say, because that was the hook that got me into it, but it was so odd, it was so bizarre, it was, for want of a better term, obviously alien. It was something that wasn't from here, you know. And that's what got me into it.
And your dad was in the Air Force anyway, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was, yeah. I mean, we had he used to take us to air shows, but we'd been, so I knew a lot of the aircraft then. And we used to make the little old Airfix kits, the models. So I knew a lot of aircraft. And in later life, as I matured and I went in the army, purely by chance, I finished up in a reconnaissance platoon. So we used to teach aircraft recognition. You had to learn about all different aircraft on both sides of the Cold War, plus different cloud formations and their heights and all things. So it was a good background for looking at sky watching and seeing what's out there.
Another thing about your sighting, there were three of you off it. So sometimes when you're on your own and you see a sighting, people don't believe you, but there's more than one. So it's a good sighting.
Yeah, well, I mean, since then, one thing that I catalogue in the book are different sightings and experiences that I've had chronologically that I've seen, and many of them, not just on my own, but many of them are with other people. And one of my latest ones that I put in the end of the book with a few photographs in, that was in September 2021, and there were 8 adults and 5 children saw it. And that was literally outside our front door. We was sat and stood on our driveway looking at it. That was amazing. And that was, we'd been out, we live in a small cul-de-sac. And the children sort of tend to play in the cul-de-sac, and then they all go in when they're having their evening meal. And the few of us were stood outside talking. My wife had gone in, and then as I turned to go in the house, I saw this bright star, and it was like 5:30, 6 o'clock, early September, and it was like, I shouldn't be able to see a star now. Even the major planets, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, you can't see them this early in the day in September. So I had my phone, there's no aircraft on it, no satellite, no space station. So it was like, whoa. So I opened the door, shouted to my wife, quick, come and look at this, bring the binoculars. And we actually had it in sight for over 30 minutes. And it was almost due east from our position where we were looking at it. And again, this is something, it's very difficult to imagine how large it is because you're just seeing a light in the sky. But when I looked at it through binoculars, and I've got some quite powerful binoculars, the 25-70s, and I had time to get reclining chairs even out of the garage, and myself and a neighbour were reclined on the chair looking at it because the binoculars are quite heavy, as you can imagine, so you can lay down almost and rest the binoculars on you so that they're not as heavy. And looking at it through that, it was a donut shape on its edge, and the donut was there, and there were other little ones like orbs flashing and flickering and moving and zooming about
Yeah.
around it. It was quite spectacular to see, and I wish I could have got pictures better than I had. Yeah. That was a good one, Bob.
Well, that's what usually happens, isn't it? When you're not ready, they always appear, and we think, "Oh, I'll get my phone out." By the time you've done that, they've gone, they've vanished.
Yeah. Well, there's.
I want to ask you about
Go on.
chapter 1 in your book about. Go on.
No, you were saying, carry on.
Chapter 1 about religion. Where does that come into it?
Well, this is it. It's
chapter 1 about religion. Does that come into it?
One thing that I say is religion is man-made, completely man-made, and it makes no difference what religion you are. It's whether you're a good person or a bad person. It's like somebody saying it's all this racism with black people and white people and yellow people and brown people. None of that should matter. It's whether you're a good person or a bad person. And it's the same with religion, because you always get good people and bad people in religion as well. But it's the way that you conduct yourself that matters, not what religion you is, because everybody has the same journey to improve themselves. Now, you've got me onto something else here, Bob, but I think over time, UFOs originally was something like, it always used to be like flying saucers from outer space when I first got into it. And there were authors like Leonard Stringfield, Donald Keogh, Jenny Randalls, Jacques Vallée started writing, and it was always scientifically, they were always trying to sort of justify how they could move these vast distances between planets. And I think as ufology has evolved over time, we're now moving into more interdimensional theories and how that would work much more logically, and also on the spiritual side of things. You don't have to be religious to be spiritual. The two aren't connected, although you can be spiritual in all religions, you know. So I think over time, ufology is moving towards this. I'm not going to say spiritual, but it's being aware of it and that it does have an effect. And that is what I went on to in my book, because where people tend to do, we'll say they'll just do a book about Rendlesham Forest or a book about Roswell, or all the different things, the Belgian UFO wave, you know, there's all these different things that people have written a book on. Or you'll get people that will write specifically about, we'll say UFO retrievals, or they'll write about Bigfoot and cryptids, where I think a lot of it is all connected. And it's now people now becoming more aware that it's the different vibrations, the different frequencies, the different wavelengths that people are on, and that these are on, that they all actually make a whole together. So instead of just doing a piece of the pie, ufology needs to realize that there's all these other things that do affect it and can be explained.
Yeah. Tell us a bit about being down the mine and something that's paranormal happened down there.
Yeah.
Some sort of energy.
Yeah. What happened was, if anybody's ever been down a mine, they have an air system where they have big fans that draw the air through, take the gases away, and keep clean air for the miners to breathe. So there's always an intake side where the air is going down towards the face. Then it goes along the coal face where they're extracting the coal. And then the return air, the fans draw it back towards the pit bottom. So where it's coming back and being drawn out, it's always warm, hot air because it's been around all the workings. So sometimes when we were working, I was working part of a road laying team, and what we used to do was go through the air doors that separate the roadways and go onto the intake side where the coal was being conveyed out of the pit on conveyor belts because it was cool, fresh air then. So we'd have a rest, go through, and down a mine, especially in the UK, when they stopped for lunch, everything stopped. Everybody had lunch at the same time. So we just say, for argument's sake, lunchtime was 1 o'clock. Everything had stopped. The conveyor belts had turned off. The machinery on the face had stopped, and everybody in the pit would sit down, have the meal, and then they would all start up at the same time. So what used to happen was we'd go through to the intake, to the cool, fresh air, where they had these transfer points, or they used to call these the button points, where one conveyor belt might load onto another one. And they generally have the, shall I say, or dare I say, the more elderly or disabled miners to still give them and keep them in a job. But it was something, and it wasn't such a physical job, and it was something they could do. So I'd go through and I'd sit with this old guy and sat there having a sandwich. And we literally sat there in the dark. And then coming towards us up this roadway came this old miner, just like a deputy. Didn't look any different, except the old deputies there used to wear their old clothes. When I was working for the coal board, everybody had bright orange uniforms on. Well, he didn't. And he also had a compressed card cap where we had the plastic ones. But a lot of the old deputies still used to wear these, you know, just to sort of prove that they'd been there a long time. Anyway, he came up towards us and literally got within about 20 feet. And then there was enough room to walk underneath the conveyor belt where one goes over onto the top of another one. There was room for him to walk under. And he walked under into this old, what they call a heading. It was maybe only 20 foot long. But it's where there'd been some old workings and they used to seal them off. But they were handy little spaces to put the transformers and things like that. So we thought he'd just gone through, checked the transformers, and they checked the seal to make sure nothing's leaking because everything's sealed off down a mine. So he ducked through and went, and we just sat there, and we'd been there in a minute and then 2 minutes, and he hadn't come. Usually they're only, you know, they're not long, and he didn't come back out. And this old guy's looking at me, and I'm looking at him, and I'm saying, you better not have a heart attack or something like that. So we both jumped up and run round to see where he was, and there was nobody there. And it was like, my hair stood up, and it was like, I mean, I wasn't scared or anything, but it was like, yeah, the thing is, what people don't realise is down the mine, there's nowhere to go. It's just tunnels, and you can't walk through solid rock or whatever, you know. There's nowhere to go. And it was like, we looked at each other and it was like, my God, you know. And he sort of, but he didn't look anything spooky or anything like that. He just looked like an old deputy from down the mine. But it was quite plain, quite clean, and we both saw the same thing because we talked about it afterwards. Because he said, don't you leave me here now, you know, we're like.
Steph's in the chat room and I'll just give you what she's brought. I mean, love stories about had 2 sightings while working at the Maltby pit.
Yeah. Well, the mine that I was down was Frickley. So it came under Doncaster area where Maltby was, but mine was Frickley Colliery.
Ah, right. Tell us about the 2, I think, the lights, what you saw in the sky. I think Bob, it was 1984. I think you were walking a dog.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sorry. You saw 2 bright lights in the sky, like headlights.
Yeah. Now, I was living in Selby then, and we had a huge dog, a Pyrenean mountain dog. and I used to like to exercise it. It's an excuse for me to go for a walk as well. And we'd been outside, and it was my wife that shouted, and she said, "Look." She shouted me over, and it was just like looking at how you see car headlights through fog. So they were spaced apart, and they were just moving like this, and they were coming over towards us, probably at about 60 to 70 degrees. No sound, no anything, just two white lights. And we're watching them, and I had two boys, and the two boys came out. So there's myself, my wife, the two children, and we watched them, and they went over the top of us, only moving really slowly, nothing apparently joining them together at all. And then literally as they passed us, they suddenly zoomed off, like proper, like warp factor 10 was the thing I thought, because they went that fast, and they were out of sight in a second, gone. And then I took the dog for a walk, keeping my eye mostly on the skies rather than the dog. And after about 20 minutes, 30 minutes, I came back into the garden. And as I came back in, I'm bolting the gate. We had a big gate because it was a big dog. They came back. And again, I didn't see them arrive, but they were moving very slowly again across until they just disappeared out of view. Now, what's really interesting about this was because I know, and I mean, our good friend Paul Sinclair will say the same. When you know that there are things out there, you don't bother reporting it because it's like, it's just another one, you know. And I hadn't reported it to anybody. And then a few years later, I was with in Beaufort, and I sort of eventually graduated to be one of their investigators. And I'd gone to see Philip Mantle. Philip lived 5 miles away from where I was. And so I went down to see him, and we were discussing cases to investigate. And he just said, I was narrating the story to him. And he went, "I saw the same thing." And I said, "No, you're kidding me, come on." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I'll tell you exactly when it was." And he said, what happened was, he said it was seen, it came in over the East Coast, came over to central England, and people saw the same thing. And then it went back out the same way that it had come in. And it was reported quite a few times to the British UFO Research Association. And Philip, being director of investigations at the time, got all the reports. But what was also interesting was Philip then worked on an industrial estate at Tingley, between Morley and Tingley. So you were like looking down over Leeds. And he said, as I came out, he said, I just finished work. And he says, as I drove out towards the main road to turn right and go home, I saw two lights in front of me. He says, and straight away, he said, I know. He says, I knew they shouldn't be there. He said, they shouldn't be there. He said, they were odd, you know. And he said, I drove to where I could get a good, clear view of them. And he said the same. He said they were like car headlights to him. One was brighter than the other. Where the bit that I got, they were the same brightness, even though they were spaced apart. So, yeah, it was nice to get that confirmation that I wasn't seeing things really.
Exactly. And Steph, you know, when she was on about it, said, I'm only just up the road, Paul, from me. I'm in Nadwick.
Yeah. Well, tell Steph, when I got that first sighting, that was in South Emsall, looking south towards Doncaster, looking towards Hoot and Pagnell and that area. And when we watched them go away from us, they were going due east, sort of towards Thorpe Marsh Power Station.
Right. And when we were talking about down the mine, Janice had just said, I'm so in mines to my granddad, who I never met till life down the pit. He leapt between the wagons. I'm sure after such traumatic end, there must be some energy residue lingering.
Oh, yeah.
That's sad.
I'm sure there is, yeah. You see, this is one of the things that I say in my book, and that is that people need to understand that everything is energy. So from these things like that, one of the things I say in my book, that I was at a place in Selby where an old pub was built from the monks' cloisters from Selby Abbey. So they used the stone from that to build the public house. Been there donkey's years. But they say it's haunted by a monk. And I think that's quite logical. If you think about it, if you've lived, we'll just say where you live now, Bob, or anybody that's listening, if you've lived where you are for 50 years, your energy is going to be imprinted on the fabric of the building around you. So at certain times, and when people are receptive, there's a chance that you can tune into that energy and you'll pick that up.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that as well. You know, because them UFOs, do you think they knew you were there? They had any connection with that?
Yes. Now, there's other people, I mean, we'll use our good friend Paul Sinclair, Philip Kinsella, loads, myself included. But the one thing that I say is they have that connection. Now, to think about it logically, that everything is energy, including you and I, the computer we sat in front of. We know, Bob, when we've met immediately, your energy knows my energy, and it knows straight away if we're going to get on or not. And people even say, they even allude to it and say we were on the same wavelength. And it's because our energies know whether people are compatible or not. And it's there all around us. I mean, now we're sat in our room, a computer in front of us. So there's all this different energy that's around us all the time. And one of the things that I say, this is on our level. This is on our, in the book I use the analogy of an LP, of an old vinyl record. So we have our ordinary matter, we'll call it that we deal with on a daily basis, has got the long radio waves at the bottom and lower energy, longer waves, and then it comes up through infrared to the visible spectrum that we see, and then it goes out through the ultraviolet, X-rays, and then gamma rays are the shorter waves and higher energy at the other end. That's normal matter that we know about and the energy that we deal with on a daily basis. Now, one thing that I say is that these cosmologists, the astrophysicists, and these people with far better brains than I are now saying that the universe works with dark energy and dark matter, and that makes up the vast majority of our universe. But because we can't see it or measure it, they know it's there by the way it influences the ordinary matter that we can see. But from our logical scientific point of view, it's out of our range of being able, from a normal person's point of view, it's out of our range of being able to see it, to measure it, to touch it. They just know it's there, so they tell us that. But if you think about it logically, the visible spectrum and acoustic spectrum that we see and use on a daily basis is less than 1/10 of 1% of the ordinary matter that we know about. So we're only seeing 1/10 of 1% of the bit we know about, but that only makes up 4 or 5% of the energy that's available in the universe. So we're seeing such a tiny, infinitesimal amount of what is out there.
Yeah.
And this is what I think, rightly or wrongly, that ET, I'll use that, these celestial beings, extraterrestrials, whatever you want to call them, some of those, quite logically, could be tens of thousands of years in front of us. So they're fully familiar with that. They know about dark energy. They know about dark matter, as well as our ordinary matter. So because they know all the energy, they can control it, manipulate it, and that's why we experience and see what we do. And that is why you get that connection, because your personal energy is like a fingerprint, but also your thoughts are an energy too. so they can influence and pick up on your thoughts and your energy and your memories, because they can pick up on it. They can just tune into it. Now, does that make sense?
It does, yeah. I know Steph has got another. She just wants to tell you this. I'll just put it on. I've had 2 sightings, one over the race course and one in my village. I wonder if there's a hotspot of activity there.
I've had a few sightings there, and I've also, there's my sister, she's, believe it or not, they found a UFO. It was I've got a sister who's a little younger than me, who's got 2 daughters, and one of the daughters has got 2 boys, and one of the boys is really intelligent, and he's always going on stuff. And he went on his grandma's house, my sister, on Google Earth, and then there's this thing in the sky. So straight away he sent it to me. Uncle Paul, what's this? What's this? And it looked like a UFO or some anomaly in the sky on Google Earth. So I actually got it, and I got the information off it, sent it off to our good friend Jason Gleaves, and Jason said it was definitely something solid and reflecting the sun's surface. So, but that were on Google Earth, and that was on the edge of South Emsall, about less than half a mile from my first sighting. So I think whether it's a hotspot or not, I don't know. But I think the problem is that I think there are a lot of these areas around there where people do see things, but people don't look up anymore. They're always looking down at the phones, aren't
they? Exactly. That's true. I know Janice had just said, where are we? I'll get her on in a minute. Steph, oh, there we are. I'll get in a minute again.
Yeah.
Steph, I'm at Adwick, Lee Street. After 2 minutes from there, I have seen a UFO over Thorpe Marsh. Before it was dim, and a few more Doncaster is definitely an hotspot.
Yeah. Well, Thorpe Marsh was an old coal-fired power station. Been there for years. Part of the Air Valley group of power stations. So
right.
Yeah. But there's a lot of people that say doing UFO.
What do you think about?
Go on.
Yeah, go on. Like, you carry on first.
I want to say there are a lot of researchers that have said that UFOs often follow these power lines and follow where the power stations are. Now, what the link is, whether they're getting energy off it, I don't know. I'm not that intelligent, but there are people saying there is a correlation, there is a connection between them.
Do you think they're on ley lines?
Quite possibly. Now, you see, this is something else, another theory that touches on things, but this goes back a long way again. But thinking about it, a lot of the old village churches were built on where the ley lines cross, where the power points were, and they mark them out. And again, it's the energy. Now, if you think about it, right, let me just run this one by you, Bob, because you'll know this one. Bempton, there are these geographical areas and geographical lines all over the world. Skinwalker's one that's famous, obviously. The Bermuda Triangle, Skinwalker Ranch, there's lots of them. But I think Bempton and that area is one of these areas as well. And what it is imagine our ordinary matter as an LP again.
Correct.
Well, the other dark energy and dark matter, there's a whole stack of records. There's 20 odd of them, and we're in the middle somewhere. And what happens is, with this energy, they're able to you get these geographical areas where the records touch. Now, Jacques Vallée, in one of his first books, Passport to Magonia, used it to explain fairy folk, and the little people and all these other things, and how folklore was handed down over the ages, and how people tried to explain these experiences. And I think Skinwalker and all these other, and there's lots of them, Bempton, they're no different. It's exactly, excuse me, it's exactly the same. They're these areas where, if you like, the areas, the records touch. So you get that crossover, and that's where you get that a lot of poltergeist activity, a lot of cryptids, a lot of UFOs, and they're in the same areas. Now, I personally think that UFOs use these areas because they're so far advanced from us. They're aware of the energy that's available, and they can use it as a shortcut to zip through these bits. So there's my next question. Have you seen any flashes of light while you've been at Bempton?
Oh yeah, of course we have. Yeah. In the field, we've seen all different colours, blues, oranges.
Yeah. You see the different colours.
And I did a thing quite a while ago.
Go on.
Where I found a line from Rendlesham Forest right up the coast up to Bempton. A ley line.
Really? Wow, that does surprise me.
Bempton, Rendlesham Forest.
Yeah, very good. Well, you'll see the different colours.
Bonkers.
Yeah, you'll see the different colours where the different frequencies within our visible spectrum. So if they're at the lower end, you'll see the red end. If they're at the more violet end, you'll see them as a purple, or generally speaking, we see them as whites because they cover the whole of the spectrum. But also, that's why you see the flashes of light where they're just passing through our frequency. So it's where they're passing through our record and it comes through our visible light, so you just see the flash. Now, if you're on your own, then it's a bit, I've just seen a flash in the sky. But when you were at places like Bempton, when I was there last, when Chris Evers was interviewing Paul for the OLM, and there were maybe 6 of us saw flashes of light in the sky. So when there's half a dozen of you that all see the same thing, then it's pretty conclusive that something was zipping through the different frequencies. So you just see it as it goes through our bit that we can see.
Janice is just saying again, years ago, I went out with a local Bobby. He told me about UFO sighting back then, and that Donkers is in a band where they're often seen in.
Yeah, it'll be an energy, but like it could be a fault line, you see. But again, ET will be aware of the fault line and use that. Rossington in the 80s.
And then Steph I have heard about UFOs landed in fields near Rossington in the early 80s. I've been told by 3 different people about, apparently it looked like a big old fairground.
Yeah.
Get more sightings on here.
Yeah, nothing surprises me, Bob. But the thing is, people don't report them. It's like, who do you turn to? And again, it depends who you turn to. We've got this culture now, if you like, where suddenly this last few years we're starting to be bombarded with documentaries and films and everything else about UFOs. So I think it's becoming much more mainstream than it ever was.
Yeah. What about alien abductions? What's your theory on them?
Right. One of the things that I say is, and again, as traumatic as it can be to people, and I'm not putting anybody down at all, what I think is, if you imagine you live on the end of we'll say a nature reserve, and you want to know the local, we'll just say the population of long-tailed tits. So you put nets up and you'll go down and you'll try and beat the birds out, or you'll capture them and you'll see how big the population is, you know, if they're healthy, what weight they have and all the rest of it. And then you just let them all go. Now, is that a similar thing to what we're doing or what we're experiencing? Where I believe that, I'll say ET for want of a better phrase, have this non-interference policy where
Yeah.
they do all sorts of things, but they're not allowed to influence us. They're not allowed to interfere. So is it in some ways, what I say is it a bizarre act of kindness, really, that they do what they do, but then they take away the memory or substitute a screen memory so that it's not as traumatic for the people that have experienced it, and they can draw a line under it and move forward with them in the normal life, so to speak. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And what about hypnotherapy? Does that work then? Trying to
Well,
find out what's happened to you if you have been abducted.
yeah. Now you see, I'm not sure whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. And I'm not saying one way or the other. I will think it does help people. And one of the more recent people that it helped is no longer with us, bless him, but Calvin Parker. After his abduction, and he remembered that clearly, but afterwards, Kath Marden regressed him, and he'd actually been abducted on 4 occasions, but he'd only normally remembered the one of them. And so, again, did it do him any good? I mean, as he matured, he learned to accept it, and I dare say enjoyed a bit of a celebrity towards the end of his life. And it was good because he realised that people accepted that he was telling the truth. But the thing is, again, you've got to weigh up the odds and decide whether you really want to know that. I mean, I don't know whether I'd want to be regressed or not and learn about it, because are they hidden for a reason?
Correct. I would be the same. Yeah, I've had things happen in my bedroom, and I think, my God, have I been abducted or not? Would I want somebody to regress me to find out? I don't know. It's
Yeah.
trouble is,
I
at the
mean,
moment, there's far too, with the internet now, people can put a UFO on there and it might not be real.
oh yeah, absolutely. And this is the problem that we're facing now, where I'll just touch on disclosure, because I think we're getting this soft disclosure. They're lifting the lid off the pressure cooker, really. They're just taking the weight off the top of it to let the pressure out, because if you go back to the post-war and into the 50s and 60s, people were told quite categorically, you will not talk about it. It's in the interest of national security. And they scared people to death, so people didn't talk about it. But now, with the advent of modern technology, and people can literally, I got one 2017 while I was at work at night, where I videoed one. And I literally videoed a UFO for 18 seconds, and I could have immediately put that onto social media, and it's out for the world to see. And they can't keep a lid on that anymore. So on the one hand, you've got this where they're slowly admitting that they might have something happening, and yes, it needs money thrown at it, and yes, we need to investigate it more, and we acknowledge that they might not be human. But by the same token, you'll not get the full disclosure. You'll never find out the truth about the Pentridge incident. You'll never find the truth about Roswell. You'll never find the truth about Rendlesham Forest. And that's because they've been complicit in keeping a tight lid on this very aggressively for over 70 years now. So they've got to the stage where it's like when they released the 3 years ago, and we got the Tic Tac, Gimbal, and Go Fast UFO videos that released. So they released those videos and said they weren't able to explain it. They were also seen by the pilots, the trained observers. They were recorded, so that was in the visible spectrum.
Right.
They were recorded on infrared on the gun cameras of the Super Hornets, so you've also seen them on infrared. And then they were also recorded on radar underneath on the carrier fleet. So they were real, they were there, and they were recorded in 3 different items. But what they also don't tell you is, or what's not general public knowledge, was when you read the ATIP report, there was actually 80 such incidents, and these witness accounts where pilots, radar, and been caught on gun camera. But so what's happened to the under 77? Or when people have tried to pursue that and ask them what's on the other 77, they've just said, well, it's national security and it's not in the public interest, so you'll never find out. But by the same token, at least they're admitting that something happened.
It's true, that. Exactly. Stephanie Speech said, I've tried to find out more. The people who told me about it are people I've worked with over the years. I know one lady said people were walking towards it out of a local housing estate. That's going back when that other thing she put on there.
Yeah.
And then Alison's just wrote, Rossington, I think they disclosed it when they're Close Encounters of the Third Kind. They don't make these kind of films for nothing, especially American Werewolf in London.
Yeah. Well, did you know that Steven Spielberg was, when he did Close Encounters of the Third Kind, was actually approached and told not to release the film. They asked him not to release it. But again, moving on, there's other, using our namesake, Paul, when they released that film. And what they're doing is, it's a psychological thing where if you go back 50, 60 years after the Second World War, where if you'd have showed somebody a grey alien and a UFO and whatever, they might have freaked out. Well, by doing these films and documentaries and all the rest of it, then it's slowly becoming embedded in society. And it's more, now you just show somebody and they just say, oh yeah, that's a grey alien. And it's a publicly accepted thing. So you've got this, if you like, this psychological, this subliminal education of the public to make it more plausible and more acceptable.
Exactly, yeah. What do you think about missing time?
Well, yeah, again, that comes down to being able to control your frequency and what you can remember. So ET, I'll use the phrase again, ET are able to do that to stop the traumatic memories or the PTSD following it, so that you don't remember, so that you can just carry on as normal. And I think it's, I'm not going to say it, is it again a bizarre kindness, as I said earlier, but I think it's, what can I say? It's a normal thing, if you can ever call it normal, within the abduction scenario. How they're able to tune people out of their immediate surroundings, and they go up through ceilings, through walls, through doors in Philip Kinsella's case, all things like that, because they tune the frequency to be in a different area. So because they've tuned it to be in a different, that barrier in there now, because that barrier is on our frequency. So by doing that, they're able to move people. And it's the same with memory, because it's an energy and they understand it. They're able to wipe that so that you get the missing time that doesn't allow you to remember. That's why I touched on it earlier when we were on about regressive hypnotherapy, and is it always a good thing or not, as the case may be?
Alex has just in today said, are you able to share the theory on poltergeist phenomena entities?
Yeah, and again, it's the same, it's an energy. Right, we'll go back to the stack of records. If you imagine God, if you want to call it that, but purity, really. Purity is the hole in the center of the record, and evil, there's no such thing as God per se, there's no such thing as the devil. But I do believe there is pure energy that we all strive to move towards. So we're somewhere in the middle of our record trying to get towards the hole in the center. That's why it makes no difference what religion you are, because it's the same distance to the center for everybody. But going back to poltergeist and other entities and elemental energy, things like that, there is evil, and there is these darker, and some of them are quite powerful as well, and they're from the lower records and the lower energies. Now, the more pure we get and the more we advance, the lighter we get, so the less effect they have on us. But going back to Bempton, going back to all these other haunted places, and I've put a poltergeist experience in my book, and there are places and energies that will use places, and it's same as Skinwalker, same as Bempton, where you get these dogmen or whatever they are, and the darker, still powerful energies, but they're able to skip the records, and that is why occasionally I worry for people like the people on Skinwalker Ranch and people like Paul and yourself going out on Bempton Cliffs. And Andy Ramsden always makes me laugh when he tells the story when Paul was going towards the eyes in the hedge, and Andy was scared to death and hanging back. And yeah, you see, and again, it's a personal thing where, yeah, it is a funny story. And it's great when he's telling you, but it's good because it highlights something that everybody's different and everybody has different energy. So in some ways, we don't always see the same thing. And that is why I think people often report things differently.
Correct.
But also, that is why Andy maybe picked up that was a dangerous thing, where Paul, being as into it as he is, could go that step further. Now, one thing that I do think we have and it's true of whether it's cryptids, whether it's poltergeist, whether it's UFOs, and sometimes people have this abject terror, this real fear, absolutely scared to death, and it's because your frequency, your higher self knows you're stepping off your record and going on to the next record where you shouldn't be. And I think that's part of it, even though physically you're not aware of it. And that's why when that happens, you're entering that different bubble of energy. And that's why we often also get reports of complete silence, because you've gone out of our normal acoustic range as well. You're on a different energy level, you're on a different frequency. So you're not going to hear anything. And that is why I believe people get that fear. I mean, and it's very real. I mean, you'll get some contactees, whether it's UFOs, cryptids, anything, and they won't even go back to where it happened because of that fear. And they don't want, it's like they sense it because they're still approaching that same area. And the higher self, the soul, their spirit, don't want that to happen again. So they try and back off, and that's why they don't like going, and that's why people get afraid. Does all that make sense?
I know. Yeah, it does. Yeah, going back quite a few years ago, I couldn't get that night, but there's Paul, Steve Ashbridge, and his partner. They were up there, and Steve's partner said, "Can you hear that whistling?" He said, "It's getting into my head." Now Paul went, "I can't hear a thing. Can't hear a thing." She said, I want to go because it's getting right into my brain now. She said, it's scaring me. And Steve said, well, I can't hear it. Only one person out of 3 could hear it. And she had to go in the finish. She said to Steve, come on, I need to go home. It was like a whistling noise. And she said it was right. The frequency was so, you could hear it.
Yeah. There
And
are
it's
a lot
same
of
as anything
instances.
else, Paul. Some people hear things and some people don't.
Yeah. There's a wonderful one where people were trying to, and I can't remember where it was now. It was in America, and they were looking for Bigfoot. Was it Alaska? I think it was Alaska. And this guy, they made this like lookout post up a tree, and they'd heard Bigfoot around them. And then he's like 15 foot up a tree in this thing with his gun like this. And then something whispered in his ear, and he said, "I was absolutely crapping myself." He says, "I was terrified." He said, I was straight down and up. He says, "I thought I was somewhere safe, you know." And he said, scared him to death. But going back to my first UFO encounter, it was only me that
I
heard
saw
it.
that as well.
Yeah, my brother, and I discussed it with both of them afterwards. And even when I was writing the book more recently, I spoke to my brother about it again. And different people experience things differently. And to him, it was just an unexplained UFO. It was just an unexplained sighting. But it didn't trigger anything, where it did with me. And I heard something as well.
It's true because I were up at quite a few years ago with Paul's daughter, me, Paul, and Mick Ganley from Scarborough. And I took a photo of an object. Only me saw it. I took the photo of it. I said to Paul, look at this. He went, bloody hell, what's that? We looked and it vanished in seconds. So Paul went over, I don't know, 300 meters away. Nothing. No footprints, no nothing. And it looked like something bent over. But I could see it, but nobody else could.
Very
Was
good.
I
Well,
tuned in more? I don't know.
yeah. Or did it tune into you more? You know.
I sent it to Jason Greaves. Exactly. And he looked at it and went, that's real. That is what you've taken there.
Yeah. That's exactly
it looks
how
like
it works.
something's over. It could have been
Yeah.
a werewolf. I don't know. And then in seconds, it vanished, gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was that coming into our reality and then going out again?
Yeah. You see, there was an instance which I relate in my book, was seeing orbs, and I was in a little place in America called Casadega, and I felt something next to me, and my wife was stood there with the camera, literally 20 feet away, and I felt something. All my hair stood on end, and I just said, "Eve, take me picture quick," and she took my picture, and then it went away. And I said, right, swap places. And literally within 30 seconds, she was stood where I was stood where she was, and I took her picture. When we looked at her picture, it was just a picture of her underneath a picture frame of Van Gogh's sunflowers, I think it was, on the wall. Nothing there. But because I'd felt something, and she took my picture, there were 7 or 8 orbs on the picture. And then nothing afterwards.
Amazing.
Yeah, but
yeah.
there's other
We've
things
just
as
about
well.
run out of time. Go on.
Oh no, I was going to say, going back to poltergeist and other paranormal phenomenon, often you'll feel that energy, and you'll feel when it comes and you'll feel when it goes. I did with the poltergeist that I experienced when I was a kid in Holland, and I knew when it had gone. And it just went, and the feeling had gone, and I went, we're all right now, you know.
Yeah, I know. Well, I was in bed one night and I couldn't move. I could feel myself, but I could feel somebody jumping on bottom of bed.
Not good.
And then I shut up, and it all went quiet. All went
Yeah.
quiet again. And I
Yeah.
thought, what the hell was them jumping up bed? I hadn't a clue what there was.
Mm.
I thought they were double bed. I felt as though there were little kids or somebody small jumping on
Yeah.
it.
Mm.
So strange. Well, it's in this house, isn't it? Where Paul is,
Yeah.
where things happen.
Yeah.
In this room, we had a voice. I did
Yeah.
a program with Andrew Collins. When we finished the show, Susan, who's in the studio in America, said, I heard a voice. I said, did you really? She said, oh, yeah, I'll get it enhanced. And it was. Andrew was talking about interdimensional. And this voice came out and said, explain. Anyway, we had it analysed by a friend who works with Robbie Williams. And it's not come from Andrew's end, it's come from the room you and Paul were sat in. Paul was sat at the side of me, like I'm sat here, he was sat there. And the voice came. Amazing.
Wow.
But don't know. Just a voice.
So it's just people understanding this, and that it's
In some
these are the
places,
frequencies
things
around us all the time.
yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Just thank you, Bob and Paul. It's been very interesting. Looking forward to reading your book. Diane's just ordered your book.
Lovely, thank you.
So she just bought your
Right. Well, if any of
and
the
yeah, so
oh, sorry,
thank you again for go on.
what I was going to say was, if any
Would
of
you
the
sign one of
listeners,
the books then?
of course I will. And if anybody's got any questions, whatever, I've got a Facebook page called It's the Real Story on Facebook, and it's all UFO related, and they can ask me on there. There's all the podcasts on there and everything else.
And you can where can they get your book? On Amazon, I presume.
Yes. Available in America, in Amazon, British, and it's just on the French one as well. Not that I speak French, but there you go. As an ebook, Kindle, obviously, Audible, I meant, hardback and paperback.
Wonderful. I've had a great night tonight talking with you. It's been very interesting. I love it. It's been
Good.
a good show. Everybody in questions in the chat room. Oops. It makes the show better. And thank you for everyone as well. Mine is Christopher. I didn't on my show before. He's wrote 5 or 6 books on lots of different subjects. So I'm sure he'll be a great guest this Friday. So that'll be the 19th. Yeah, 19th of April at 7 p.m. in the UK. Yes, Paul, it's been lovely having you on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's been great to chat.
Yes, thank you. You take care.
And
you look after yourself. I'll just end this stream. Yes, thank you again.